I am here with a video that I have been thinking about making for quite some time. Since starting at my YouTube channel, I think it's almost been about a year now. I have received this same question that most of us YouTubers have over and over and over and over and over again. And that question is, I'm just starting out using cloth pads, or I just found out about cloth pads and I want to start out using them. Help. There's so much. I don't know what the terms mean, and there's just so many choices to choose from. Please help me. What do I do? So I decided that it might be the easiest to create a video with the 5 questions that a person should be asking themselves and answering before starting their cloth pad journey. So I've got a list here with some notes. Question number 1. What type of disposables did I like the best? What shape were they? How long were they? How thick were they? So I've got a couple of disposables here. Funny thing, I haven't used disposables in over 6 years. And I had to pull these out of a box that was packed up in the bottom of my laundry closet. They've been in there so long. This one's getting like discolored. I don't know what that's from. It's kind of gross. But these are old, so I don't know, don't ask me what their names are. I have no idea. But these are 3 examples of the disposable pads that I would wear. They are, as you can see, they're all symmetrical, and they are all a little bit longer. Even before I use cloth pads, I needed a longer pad because I'm both a front, center, and back bleeder. And what that means is when I have my cycle and I'm not using any internal protection, when the blood comes out of my body, it would go all over the pad. It would go towards the front, it would go towards the back, it would go towards the middle. Now, some people will only bleed towards the front. Some people will only bleed towards the center. That's called a center bleeder. And some people are back bleeders, and they would, primarily bleed on the back of their pad. So you need to think, pull out your disposable pads if you still have some. Take a ruler and measure. How long were they? Okay, take your favorite pad, measure it. How long was it? How wide across is it? How thick is it? What were you comfortable with? I was always comfortable with one of the more plush pads. I also liked the cotton style pads. Those dry wick moisture ones were ick. They, like this plasticky material, I hated that. It was so gross. I wanted one that kind of felt cottony. Like even before I knew and used cotton pads, I was looking for a cotton-like material on my disposables because I can't stand the feeling. It just makes my skin crawl, those plastic ones. So once you've taken your disposable pad and you've determined the size and shape of it, write it down somewhere so you don't forget. And then ask yourself the next question. What type of flow do I have? As I was saying a little bit earlier, where on the pad do you bleed? That's going to be really important for determining the type of pads you're going to need when you start purchasing them. You also need to figure out if you are a light, moderate, or heavy bleeder. And that can be hard to know, especially if you had been previously using internal protection like tampons. You can kind of determine whether or not you were a heavy, moderate, or light bleeder based on if you used a light, moderate, or heavy tampon and how frequently you had to change them. But what's light for one person might be completely different for the other. What's heavy for one person is going to be different for the other as well. So it's really going to go by how long you could wear something before you were either uncomfortable and wanted to change or bled through and needed to change. Determine that, because personally, I have a fairly, regularly heavy cycle. I'm not, I don't have endometriosis, or I don't have any, disorders that may make me bleed heavier. Although I am anemic, So I definitely do have a heavier cycle. But even though I have a heavier cycle, I still use moderate pads. I just change more frequently. As long as the pad is long enough, okay, it's more important for me to have a long pad than it is to have a heavy absorbency pad. And the reason that is because I change them more often. Number 3, how long does my cycle usually last? This is going to be the greatest factor in determining how many pads you're going to need. Okay, this is the big question. How long do I bleed for? If you're somebody who has a cycle that's normally 3 days long, you're going to need far less pads than somebody who's 6 days, obviously. So determine that, do a little bit of math, figure out, how many pads you may or may not go through in a day, times that by the number of days that you bleed, and there you go. You've got the number of cloth pads you need. I know that sounds a little complicated, but it really comes down to you specifically. Normally on any given cycle, I wear anywhere from 15 to 25 cloth pads. If you watch some of the What I Wore This Month videos, there are lots on YouTube, you'll see the average is different for everyone. And then what would you be most comfortable, this is number 4, sorry, what would you be most comfortable using and washing, okay? You also want to consider cleaning your cloth pads. If you're somebody that has barriers to being able to wash your cloth pads, you're really going to want to think about and prep for that scenario. If you don't have a washing machine in your home, are you comfortable bringing them to a laundromat and washing them? I personally would be fine with that, but then again, I've never had to do it, so I can't say for sure how I would feel in that exact moment. But I also have a cloth pad keychain and talk about cloth pads frequently in public places, looks and all, and it doesn't bother me. I think it's an important thing to discuss. I don't think our bodies should be discussed behind closed doors. It's natural, and it's one of the most fundamental aspects of being a woman. It takes over a week of our lives every single month. The fact that we can't discuss it is ridiculous, but I'm getting off topic. So do you have any barriers to being able to wash the cloth pads? And how do you feel about washing the cloth pads? This is something that you should prep yourself for. If you have any issues with blood, that may factor in when you're purchasing pads. You may want to purchase darker pads. With that being said, a lot of people think that they're going to have issues. I was one of the people, all of my first pads were black, okay? But as I went along in time, and especially once I found the Rumps community online and started purchasing pads from other makers, I realized that it doesn't bother me at all to wash cloth pads. When my daughter goes out and plays soccer and, falls on the ground and gets dirty, do I throw her clothes out? No, I throw them in the wash. And even though she might have been rolling around somewhere where a dog's gone to the bathroom, and I guarantee her clothing has far more bacteria than my cloth pads would, I don't second guess putting them in the washing machine. So, these are things you have to think critically about. Really deconstruct that thought process in your brain to see where your hangups are and why you may have them. I've mentioned in other videos, I had a sister who literally would get mad at me if I would try to bring up cloth pads. She was utterly disgusted at the thought and would really get frustrated with me if I tried to bring it up with her. Okay, so apparently the last little bit of my video did not record. It stopped somewhere around me recounting the fact that my sister didn't like cloth pads and was utterly disgusted by them and would actually get mad at me if I brought them up, to now loving cloth pads and using them herself. So that would have been question number 4. So let's continue on from there. The last question that I have on my list that I came up with was, what am I prepared to spend on my starter stash? This is an important question. Buying cloth pads in the short term can be expensive, but save you a lot of money in the long term. If you're somebody that's doing this for economical reasons, where it's really important for you to purchase the right pads and to, ensure that they're going to be useful to you in the ways that you want them to be, you really need to think about this. Also, if you're on a tight budget and you don't have a lot of money and you don't want to purchase the wrong pads because you may not have money to purchase the right ones, really, really, really think about this. The first thing that I'd want you to think about is, are you able to make your own? There are so many great YouTube tutorials. There are so many awesome free pad patterns out there that can enable you to make some of your own cloth pads. A lot of the makers in this community started sewing because they were making cloth pads. It is an enjoyable thing to do, so consider if you'd like to do that. If you don't feel comfortable sewing or you don't want to sew, that's fine as well. Do you know somebody who could make them? Could you possibly gather or purchase the materials, print or purchase a pattern, provide that to somebody, and then have them make the pads for you? Even if you just had them make a couple so that you can try them out for one day, could you do that? If you are looking to buy, this is really important. Some steadfast advice, the best advice that I could give you purchasing from the huge number of makers that I've ordered from, is purchase from a well-known, established pad maker. That is not to say that there aren't many new pad makers out there that aren't amazing. One of my favorite pad makers is relatively new. But if you purchase from a well-known maker, especially if you purchase on Etsy and you have the ability to see how long they've been selling pads, how many they've sold, and read their feedback. Etsy is an amazing platform for this reason alone. Read the feedback, see what people have been saying, and then from that point you can determine whether or not it's a good fit for you. The big one out there that most of us think of when we think of a well-known cloth pad maker would be Yurtcraft. Lisa's been making and selling pads for years. She has tons of great Etsy feedback, tons of Etsy sales. And she also stocks extremely frequently. Every day but one a week, she has new pads in her shop. She also sells from a wide range of sizes in different absorbencies. So what I would suggest is purchase a few longer, heavier flow pads from a maker. If you don't know what your bleeding pattern is, determine how much you bleed and what your bleeding pattern is, and then use that information to figure out what type of pads you need for daytime use. If you were able to determine from your disposables what your bleeding pattern is, what size you like, then purchase those size pads. But don't purchase a full stash from one maker. We all love a variety of makers. There are so many amazing makers out there to choose from that purchasing all of your cloth pads, even if they're a very well-known maker and it's almost guaranteed you're going to like them, you may end up realizing that, hey, I thought I was a center bleeder. Actually, I bleed more towards the front. And maybe you want to then go purchase some front bleeder patterns. So don't buy all of them. Buy a handful, buy a couple. I'd say 2 to 4 at the most in a longer overnight style or in the style that you need from a maker, and use those first ones to determine what you like and what you don't like. Some people prefer flat cotton top pads. Some people prefer wicking jersey. Some people prefer OBV. Flat cotton is kind of the universal starting point for most people. Almost every pad maker sells primarily flat cotton pads. And then you can get into more of the specialty fabrics. But that is a good place to start. So that is the end of my video. So one more time to recap, what are the 5 questions that you need to ask yourself? Number 1, what type of disposables did I like best? i.e., what shape were they? How long were they? Were they plush style? Were they ultra thins? Think about that. Number 2, what type of flow do I have? Where on my pad do I bleed? How often did I have to change my disposables? Was I a light, moderate, or heavy bleeder? And number 3 is, how long does my cycle last? How long do I have my period for? That's going to be the biggest factor in determining how many pads you need for a cycle. And then number 4, what would I be most comfortable using and washing? If you are primarily a tampon user, moving to cloth pads might be a little bit jarring for you. You might not like the feeling of bleeding. You may not be used to the sensation. Perhaps it's time to consider a menstrual cup. There are tons of great videos out there preparing and readying people for menstrual cup use. There's lots of great information. Try searching YouTube. It's a great resource for that. And then lastly, how much are you going to be prepared to spend? Again, it can turn into a very expensive habit. But overall, at the end of the day, there are ways to do it economically as well. The first and most important thing you need to figure out is how you bleed and what type of pad you're going to need. There may be a little bit of stumbling to start with because, as you'll see from my overnight disposable, let's see, which would be an average. This would be an average pad that I would use for daytime use. It's even longer, slightly, than the pad I used to use for overnight. And the pad I now use for overnight use is a good like 4 inches longer than this one. This is a 14 inch and I like an 18 inch for overnight. So I started with, like, I'd say this is probably about 12.5 inches overnight. I now use 18. So this was a good starting point. This pad is around the same size and I can't get away with it for overnight. What do I prefer the most? I prefer something a little bit longer. I'm a little bit more comfortable with something a little bit longer. Whereas this size, which would have been something similar to what I would wear during the day, I don't think this was an actual pad that I wore. I really don't know where this one came from. But it would be around this size for daytime use. And my average daytime pad, again, is about 2 inches longer. So I like it a little bit longer. Doesn't mean that this cloth pad won't absorb just as much as this. It just means that I feel a little bit more protected. And because I'm not so squeamish about having a cloth pad up against my body, I don't mind it being a bit longer. The reason I didn't wear a longer pad in this style is because I hated the feeling of it. I hated it pressed up against my skin. So I would try to wear the smallest one possible. Well, that's not the case with cloth pads, so I wear whatever I prefer at this point. All right, ladies, so that is the end of my 5 questions you should ask yourself when getting started with cloth pads. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. Otherwise, I will be back next time. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye.